Hi, I'm Alex Howard, and welcome to this week's episode of In Therapy, where we follow real people on their therapeutic journeys. In this week's episode, we're going to be catching up with Sanaya. If you haven't watched Sanaya's first episode, I do encourage you to check that out. You can find out more about her story and what's brought her to In Therapy. But in this week's episode, we are really exploring how understanding your anxiety, understanding the biological processes that happen with anxiety, can help break that link of anxiety about anxiety. Also, for this week's episode, we're sharing the full session. We're exploring a new format where we don't cut an hour's therapy into 20 minutes. We let you really see, in a sense, behind the scenes, the kind of warts and all of what happens on the therapeutic journey. But if you prefer to have the sound bites, do make sure you're subscribed to my YouTube channel, because we're sharing mini clips from the episodes as we go through the week. I also encourage you to click the bell icon, and that will mean that as we release those clips and new episodes, YouTube will notify you, it will let you know. Please do also follow my Instagram at Alex Howard Therapy for daily inspiration and support. This week, we catch up with one of our new In Therapy participants, 22-year-old Sanaya. In our first therapy session, Sanaya discussed how her anxiety has increased significantly since she had to leave university very abruptly last year due to COVID. Since then, Sanaya has struggled to find work, and this also impacts her mood and self-worth. Sanaya, it's lovely to see you.
Hello.
It's been a little bit longer than we planned.
Yeah.
But how have you been? How are things going?
Since we last spoke, I was quite good straight after that. And then for the past 2 weeks, I've been just plummeted. It was I was trying to force myself to do the modules you'd given me. And I had already done some of them the week before. But in those I think it was last week, I couldn't even bring myself to do that. I was just there's no point. But actually this week I felt a lot better. I don't know why, but it feels like I've just come out of this. But now I'm anxious, when's it gonna happen again?
Okay.
So it's just it's been really up and down.
And when you in that low place, describe a bit more what you feel, what's going through your mind.
Yeah.
What's the felt sense of being in that place?
It's it was funny because there was a point where I was really thinking about it, and I was I don't even feel anxious anymore. I just feel really low. Sorry.
It's okay.
I just feel I've just found it hard to carry on. So yeah.
Say a bit more about that.
I think it's just once I reach a certain level, I'm I just can't really I don't know how to make myself do anything. I think, sorry.
I'll give you a tissue.
Thanks.
There you go.
I was I really don't want to cry.
I'm going to chop the box.
Thanks. But yeah, I just feel any opportunity, I just start crying, and I'm why am I crying?
It's okay. If there's one place in the world it's okay to cry, it's in this room.
Yeah. But yeah, I don't know why I've been feeling like this. But yeah, it's just really, really low. I force myself out of bed and get to the gym.
So you have maintained doing that throughout?
Yeah, I think I know that I just feel way worse when I don't go to the gym. So it's kind of I force myself to the gym, but even then, it's not the same after.
Do you have a sense of the pathway into feeling low? It sounds because it sounds at the moment your mood is a little bit, it's up and it's down, and it's not always clear why it's up and down.
Yeah.
I think the more that we can make sense of that, the more we can understand. And often it's not one factor. Often it's a little bit, if you think about your mood being like a boat with different loads on it, and it's not one load that causes your mood to go down. Often it's too many loads together that sort of feel overwhelming. And often initially we work quite hard to kind of keep ourselves on track, and a lot of effort goes into that. And then we get to the point, so I just can't do it anymore. And that's the collapse of mood. And sometimes in those places of low mood, there's also, because we sometimes just sort of give up, everything seems too hard. There's also a kind of rest that happens because we're not fighting so hard to keep things going.
Yeah.
And then a little bit of energy and motivation starts to come back in again. And then we sort of find ourselves climbing back out.
Yeah.
If you were to think about what those loads might be, like the things that feel that they're weighing you down, what might some of those be? I think one of them, just to kind of jump in, I think one of them is this ongoing anxiety, right? That your nervous system feels ramped up. So things that wouldn't otherwise be anxiety-inducing become anxiety-inducing. So everything is just harder than it otherwise would be because you're working to manage your kind of anxiety, and as we talked a bit about last time. What would be some of the other things that you think are a load on you and on your system?
I think what kind of adds to the anxiety more than anything is like not having a job and like not really knowing what like I'm doing with my day. But yeah, other than the anxiety, I don't really know. Yeah, I'm not really sure what else kind of, I don't know. I feel like anxiety is like the main thing and like lots of different things kind of just add to it.
So it's almost like because of the anxiety, things that wouldn't be hard become much harder. Like not having a job is hard in lots of ways, right? It's hard because of the pressure to put yourself out there and to get a job, and that feels like probably a burden. But also not having a job also means you have a lot of time to think. And time to think isn't always helpful because then probably what happens is the catastrophizing in your mind sort of getting run away is allowed to do that more than perhaps otherwise it would.
Yeah, definitely. And I think I was just like really anxious about this session because I was like, I knew that I'm going to have to talk about it.
Yeah. So is there, one of the patterns that people I think often can have is that they know that they're struggling with anxiety, for example, but if I don't talk about it, I don't have to think about it. So as soon as they feel a bit better, they almost don't want to talk about it because it's almost, if I can pretend it's not happening, then it's not happening. And the very act of putting a spotlight on it is in of itself sometimes anxiety inducing. Like we almost feel it more. The problem is for the anxiety pattern to be different, you have to learn some strategies to do it differently.
Yeah.
And as we talked about last time, you've got some strategies that you use, and those strategies help some of the time, but you just need better strategies, and you probably need more options in terms of strategies.
Yeah.
It sounds like, though, when you get to that place of low mood, there's also a place of not wanting to talk about it. Is that also right? So it's almost when things are better, you don't want to talk about it, but also when things are bad. Talk me through what happens in that when you're in that place where you're particularly low. It sounds like there was just no sort of motivation to do anything.
Yeah, I just either just like kept napping, or I would just try and give myself things to do where I knew like I wouldn't have to, do anything that would make me really anxious. So like, I wouldn't go and meet my friends because that involved like getting on a train or something. But like doing things with my family, I kind of like forced myself to try and keep busy to do something like that, which probably helped me. But I guess, in turn, I just kind of was trying to forget about it, basically.
So there's a sort of, it sounds like when things are going well, there's an avoidant pattern of not wanting to talk about it. And when things are going badly, there's an avoidant pattern of not wanting to talk about it. Yeah. Is there a place in between? There's a sort of, or is it just generally the strategy is to do the best you can to pretend that it's not happening?
Yeah, probably do the best I can to pretend it's not happening.
Yeah. How common do you think that is?
Yeah, pretty common, I guess.
I mean, it's one of the main strategies that people use, right? Because it's like, I'm anxious, but if I pretend that I'm not anxious, then I won't feel like I'm anxious. The problem is, if we want the circumstances of our life to be different, we have to learn to do something different. And being here, of course, is challenging. Like, we're putting literally a spotlight on what's happening. And it is possible to learn strategies for it to change. It's possible to have different ways of being with it. It takes a certain amount of courage, in a sense, in the short term, but also a certain amount of just, fuck it, I've had enough of things being like this, and I'm going to do what it takes to give a chance to things being different. One of the things that can also sometimes happen with, for example, the videos that I sent, is that sometimes people can have resistance that comes up to watching them, because the very act of talking about it and listening to someone talk about it in of itself can feel a bit anxiety inducing. And it's almost like, I don't want to watch it, because if I watch it, am I going to get more worried by watching it? I don't know if that's something that you experienced.
Yeah, it was kind of like, when I was good, I was watching it and I was really interested in it and enjoying it. And then especially like the meditation parts, like I found like I was meditating and like really enjoying it and felt a lot calmer afterwards. And then I think the other two videos, I was at a point where I was watching it, but if I wasn't doing something else, like tidying my room or brushing my teeth or something, and I was focusing on it, I would then just turn it off because I didn't really want to listen to it, basically. So I did listen to them and like do all the tasks, but it took me a while to get through it all, and like it was all in different stages. I didn't watch the third and the fourth video the whole way through at all. It was like in different chunks, just because, I wasn't even busy. I just wanted I didn't want to do it.
Can you? So I'm really. This is not about a shaming of you having not done it. It's actually the opposite. I'm really interested in that resistance that comes up, because I think that's part of what we need to understand to be able to change what's happening. Often the inner resistance that we have develops as coping strategies to help us get through difficult things that we go through. So we go through a challenging time, we develop the best coping strategies we can to deal with that, and then they just sort of become our habits, and then we get used to doing that, and then it becomes our default way of responding to things. I'm wondering if you have a sense of where that kind of pattern comes from, of sort of not wanting to talk about it or think about it, or is that something you remember learning at some point? Like, was there any sort of any memory around feeling anxious and feeling either shamed or embarrassed about feeling anxious, or feeling that if you talk about it, it's going to make it worse? Or do you have any sense of where that comes from?
I feel like a lot of ways of like dealing with it and getting through it, I've kind of been able to push it away, or been like, oh, just like carry on and like fake it till you make it kind of thing. But I feel like, especially with COVID, I feel like it just caught up with me. Yeah.
The problem is that what we resist will persist. So the more that you push away that part of you, also it just takes so much energy to push away and to sort of fight those feelings. And I think that's where you go into this sort of anxiety-induced depressive state almost, where it's taken so much energy to fight against it, and then you just get to the point of just exhaustion, and you sort of collapse a little bit for a few weeks, and you're physically tired, you're emotionally tired, you probably feel a bit numb as well in that place because of all the effort that goes into fighting it.
Yeah. I think one of the reasons why I feel a lot better this week is because I've got just a temporary job for this week.
Okay, congratulations.
That has just like come out of nowhere. So I think a lot of my anxiety from last week and the week before, was probably down to like money. I felt like a lot of my friends were like going out and stuff, and I was struggling to keep up. And it was just I just hate worrying about money as well. So yeah, I think this week has been quite good purely because I know I've got this job. It finishes on Friday, but it's just an extra bit of income that I didn't think I was,
and also
going to have.
it's given you a purpose and a focus and a sense of some community, probably some identity. Like it's not just the money piece, although obviously the money is part of it.
Yeah, like I feel so much better once I am working. Yeah, money is good, but also getting up for a reason.
Yeah.
So
what's interesting is that it sounds like your mood has been, and when I say your mood, I mean including sort of the anxiety and the emotions and sort of that kind of wider piece, is quite heavily dependent upon what's happening in your life, which of course is for all of us in its own way. But we want to be able to get you to a place where there's a level of emotional stability and resilience that doesn't feel so easily shaken and impacted by what's happening. And equally, anyone who spent a sustained amount of time looking for work and not having work is going to struggle. That's a objectively difficult experience to go through. So I think it's important to be gentle and to be kind towards yourself, that it is challenging. I think it would be really helpful if we could work to get meditation to the same attitude as going to the gym. Right? That you went, and I'm really impressed by the fact that you went to the gym even in your lowest point, because it sounds like there was an awareness that I will feel even worse if I don't do this.
Yeah.
Which is a sign that, you were able to maintain a level of functioning even though you were clearly in a really difficult place. It would be, if we can find a few more things like going to the gym that just, I talk about it as psychological scaffolding, that it's like, if this is us that's sort of wobbling and all over the place, and which we all can be in our own ways, the scaffolding sort of becomes a stability that just helps us sort of stay a bit more steady. And going to the gym can be one of the pillars of that. Meditation can be one of the pillars of that. Having more awareness can be one of the pillars. How you relate to yourself. And it's like you gradually build these different ingredients that just give more stability to how you feel.
Yeah.
And you've already got a taste of that with the going to the gym. We just need to build upon that and to have more of that.
Yeah, definitely.
When you think about your anxiety and the sort of episodes that you've experienced, how do you feel towards your anxiety? If we'd like to talk about your anxiety as like a thing, how do you feel towards it?
It's just annoying. Yeah, it's really frustrating, I guess. I obviously don't like it.
And if you were to turn your anxiety into like an object or a person or like a symbol, or like what would represent your anxiety, do you think?
Just something that I can't really change.
Okay, so there's a belief that you can't change it.
Yeah.
Okay, what are some of the other things that you think about with that?
Like scared.
Okay, so it's something that you can't change. It's something you feel scared of. What else?
Like it's just really intense, I guess, and I can't really escape it when it happens.
So there's a sense of it being overwhelming as well. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
And yet, there have been times that you've been able to have different experiences.
Yeah.
Tell me about some of those.
Yeah, so when I just like force myself to go out and like do some exercise or something on times that I felt like really, really anxious and like kind of like my body feels a bit like I can't really control it. I've taken myself out for a run, and that usually calms me down, definitely. And then, there's like been other times where I felt anxious, mainly about a journey or something, and I've just forced myself to do it, and like I always know that it's going to be fine. Yeah. But it's just like this worry of like.
So what you're recognizing is when you use an avoidance strategy, it tends to actually make it worse, right?
Yeah, definitely.
what are some of the inner critic patterns, like the self-judgment patterns that tend to come in when you have anxiety? So the ways that you judge yourself, criticize, because I think there's also a shame element, right? That what people might think or how you judge yourself with that.
I think it's just, I don't want people to judge me for it. And I also judge myself for it.
Yeah.
Like if I was someone else, I just would hate her.
Is that true though? If you saw someone else that was feeling afraid, would you hate them? Because I don't think that, I'm not sure that's true. I think your inner critic has a whole way of judging you and beating you up. But I think if you saw someone else that was feeling upset or feeling as scared, I think you'd be empathic, I think, towards that person.
Yeah, it's just different when it's like how you want yourself to like look.
So it doesn't meet your idealized self-image, the way that you want people to perceive you.
Yeah, basically, yeah.
So I'm curious about we all do this, by the way, so I'm smiling because it's like such a universal thing.
Yeah.
Who's the person that you think you need to be liked, to be, loved, to be saved, all the things that you want to be in the world?
I'm definitely someone who's just confident.
So someone comes across as confident.
Yeah, and like doesn't cry all the time.
I don't think you cry all the time. You're in a very specific context right now where I'm asking you all the questions you probably don't want me to ask you, which of course that feels challenging. So
just I don't know, someone who's like fun all the time and doesn't really worry about things.
Is anybody fun all the time?
Well, no, but I want to be.
So here's one of the things that often happens, that inner critic voice that we all have has this impossible ideal of who it says we need to be, we should be, we have to be. And then we compare ourselves against that ideal and we never quite live up to it. And the further we get from it, the more stressed we become, the more worried we become, the more anxious we become. And then the closer we get to it, often we don't even feel better for getting close to it because it's almost like a moving thing that however well we do, it's never quite good enough for that idealized image.
Yeah.
So it sounds to me like you're putting an enormous amount of pressure on yourself as well. You're pressuring yourself to be fun and confident and have it all together and to be that way all the time. And if you're not that way, there's this sort of relentless self-criticizing, judgment, beating up on yourself, giving yourself a hard time.
Yeah.
And it sounds pretty harsh to me. What do you think?
Yeah, I know it's harsh, but yeah, it's just a lot different when it's yourself. I don't really think that I'm being harsh on myself at all because I don't really.
Because you're normalised to it. This is what you do. Yeah, totally. And that's part of yours and my job together here is to put a spotlight on some of those things so you can go, well, hang on, actually, maybe I don't have to do it that way. And maybe actually it's not even helpful that I'm doing it that way.
Yeah.
When you have anxiety, what do you think is actually happening in your body? What do you think is actually the sort of physical construct of that anxiety?
It's like an anticipation for something to happen, but nothing's actually happening.
Yeah, so on a very simple physiological level, your body is pumping certain chemicals.
Yeah.
So you're pumping a lot of adrenaline and a lot of cortisol. And those hormones, those chemicals in the sense of the body are designed to give your body the resource it needs to respond to physical danger. So like if you're walking down the street and you don't see a bus coming out, you step into the road and suddenly the bus goes flying past, you get a massive hit of adrenaline, of cortisol, so you can respond, right? And it's for what's called the fight, flight, or freeze response.
Yeah.
I wouldn't fight the bus. I mean, you could try fighting a bus, but you're more likely to flight, to trying to get away from the bus. You might freeze and not move and hope that it doesn't hit you. It requires a great deal of energy in that moment to respond, which is why there's a whole bunch of physiological changes that happen. So, for example, blood goes from your digestive system to your arms to your legs, so you've got the kind of the power to be able to respond quickly. That's great if you're under physical threats, or if you're being chased by a saber-toothed tiger. You need that adrenaline, that cortisol to be able to respond to the situation. The difference is the danger is often an imagined danger. So think about going on the tube and what if I feel anxious and what if this happens, what if that happens. There's not a physical threat to deal with in that moment. So you've got all of these chemicals pumping through your body. You've got adrenaline, you've got cortisol, and cortisol's a powerful hormone. It's like, like in the movies where someone's like flatlined and they inject them and they go, they kind of shoot away. They're putting adrenaline in their body. So you're pumping all of that adrenaline through your body, and you're not, it's unneeded. So you've got all this additional energy that's pumping through your body. But also, that's why when you exercise, what you're actually doing is you're burning off that unnecessary energy, which is why you feel calmer on the other side of it. The other thing that happens is you probably stop breathing. So what happens is your breathing will become very shallow, and so the balance of carbon dioxide and oxygen to your brain starts to change, and that it's almost like when we stop breathing, our body thinks that we're dying because it's not getting enough oxygen. This is why one of the most powerful things you can do when you have anxiety is just to breathe deeply, because it will counteract, it will shift that balance. So the challenge is when we have anxiety is anxiety thoughts tend to create more adrenaline and cortisol, which then creates more anxiety thoughts. So you get in this loop that you worry in your mind. You pump adrenaline and cortisol in your body so you feel more anxious, so your mind speeds up and you worry more. That's the cycle that you go into when you have anxiety, or if you're having a panic attack, that you're pumping these chemicals, these hormones in your body, which are designed to run really fast or to fight, to deal with physical danger. But because there's no physical danger, you're just sat with all these hormones pumping through your body. And then it's almost like your brain starts to look for danger because your brain's trying to make sense of it. Right. So your body's in a state of physical danger. So your brain's then looking for, what if this happens and what if that happens? And then it almost becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, because although there isn't actually any danger, you've got all the responses if there is. And in a strange way, if there is a physical danger, like, you nearly get hit by a bus or whatever, then once you know you've survived, the whole thing calms down again, because it's like, oh my God, that was a bit of a shock. Oh my God, I've been more careful. I shouldn't cross the road listening to music. Like there's a calming down response. But in the instance of an imagined danger or anxiety, you also don't get that moment of, oh, now it's okay, which is why distraction sometimes works. If you distract yourself enough, guess what happens? Your body stops releasing adrenaline and cortisol, and those levels start to calm down again. And then you suddenly go, oh, actually, I feel a bit calmer. So then the mind calms down, and then it's almost like it's a bit like in, have you ever seen any of those kind of Cold War films where Russia and America are kind of ramping up a kind of missile attacks, and then one goes down a level and the other one goes, and so the whole warning system sort of gradually comes down again. So part of learning to work with anxiety is firstly understanding the thoughts which tell your body to release adrenaline and cortisol. So if we can understand the thoughts that trigger that response in your body, we can start to work with some of those thoughts. There's different ways and different strategies we can use to work with those thoughts. The second thing is when those hormones, when those chemicals are pumping through your system, understanding what's happening and why it's happening can be very helpful. Because if we don't look at it through the reference point we're talking about here, all we know is that our body's in a state of anxiety and there must be something wrong, and it becomes this sort of self-fulfilling prophecy that the more we think about it, if we can recognize, I've just released a load of adrenaline and cortisol, it's probably going to take a little bit. If I stop releasing it, my blood levels are already too high. It's going to take 5-10 minutes for those, if I stop pumping more, for those blood levels to calm and come down to normal. So it's learning to be with, in this moment right now, I don't like the way that I feel, but I understand why I feel this way. And if we can learn strategies to calm your system, what is a sort of going in and ramping up, You notice it go up and you catch it and you stop it, and then you can learn to calm your system down. It's, in a sense, one of the ways to think about it is from the perspective of what's called neuroplasticity, which is where you condition or train your brain to do something. This is where someone like Emma Raducanu playing tennis has drilled these shots so many times that it's not like she sees a ball come over the net and goes, oh, I'm going to move my arm. The whole thing's a completely automatic response. Yeah. It's a conditioned response. And this is why with tennis players or golfers, if someone comes and starts to change a few things in their swing, it can completely throw their game off for a little bit. So they have to relearn all of those pieces to recondition the pattern. You've learned a load of conditioned responses. So in certain situations, like public transport, certain things, there's a whole bunch of thoughts that go with that. And those thoughts trigger a whole bunch of hormone responses, which then trigger a bunch more thoughts around that. We need to gradually change some of those conditioned responses, some of those patterns, to train your system to just then naturally respond in a calmer way. Yeah. Really the point that I'm wanting to make is that what feels scary and overwhelming and out of control, there's a whole science to it. There's a whole mental, emotional, physiological process that's happening, and we can understand it and we can learn to change it. I know I just gave you like a 10-minute science lesson, load of information. I think it's important to have a shared vocabulary in terms of understanding it. I'm wondering, as I've been talking, what's been going through your mind about that? Does that make sense? Does that help? Does that not help? Like I'm interested in how that is for you.
Yeah, well, it's kind of comforting knowing that, okay, it's all science. And that it can like be changed. And just, it is just something that I just need to like train myself to and like get used to, like thinking a different way or like coping in a different way. But yeah, like it's definitely comforting, like, and interesting knowing how we're all like what triggered, like how we're all like triggered and stuff.
Yeah.
Basically. But yeah.
So I think the way to think about it is there's really 3 time points in this. There's what I call anticipatory anxiety. So there's anxiety before you do something where you're imagining all the things you don't want to have happen. There's then anxiety as it's happening, like anxiety in real time. There's then a sort of post-mortem anxiety that something's happened and we're now replaying what's happened in our mind. And if you ever have that experience where you have a bad experience and then you keep rethinking about it, right?
Yeah.
Which is almost like preparing to have an anticipatory anxiety next time we go into that situation. Yeah. So, for example, you have experience on public transport, you keep replaying it afterwards and you practice. It's almost like you're training your mind to have that experience. And then next time you go on public transport, you start remembering all the times that it hasn't gone well. Yeah. So you train your system to respond in that way.
Yeah. Yeah.
So if you can teach yourself to have a negative experience, you can teach yourself to have a positive experience. It's about understanding the science and the structure of how those experiences are created.
Yeah.
Coming back to what we were saying a little bit earlier about your relationship towards anxiety. Having talked a bit about how anxiety is created, the sort of the physiology of anxiety in terms of the chemical releases that happen and the thought patterns, understanding it a bit more, how does that change how you feel towards it?
I still like dread it, but like understanding it's a bit more comforting knowing that I do understand it. Whereas before, when you don't really know much about it, it's kind of like a lot more scarier. And also, you're not really sure how to deal with it. Whereas like knowing more about it, you kind of know, okay, there is a way to deal with it. Like there is you don't have to feel like that, I guess.
Yeah. Because obviously there are different pieces to this, and we're just getting started in our work together around it. But just one particular thing I think is worth mentioning is, if you're in a moment where anxiety is really high, that you're having a sort of, a sense of panic attack, or you're having really strong anxiety, in that moment, there's not a lot of capacity for lots of rational thinking because our mind's already racing too fast. The thing that I always say to people is, remember, there are chemicals and hormones that have been released that once your levels start to normalize, you will feel better again. Every time in your life that you've had intense anxiety, at some point, you've always come out of it.
Yeah.
So when we're in it, the fear is, this is going to last forever. I'm never going to get out of this. And that's what makes it so intense and so overwhelming. If we can remember, this is a feeling that feels really intense right now, but I know that the reason why I feel this way is my cortisol and my adrenaline is kind of gone super high. It will come down, and the fastest way to get it down is to breathe, to try and calm those thoughts that are feeding it, and then you gradually, and as soon as if your anxiety's gone from a 3 or 4 up to a 9 or 10, as soon as you see it drop to a 7 or a 6, you can relax because you can see that the trend is that it's coming down. So it's finding that kind of that perspective in the fire of the storm to go, this is a chemical reaction that's happening in my body that's making me think and feel all these things, but it's going to pass. And the fastest way for it to pass is to stop perpetuating it by feeding it, in a sense. I don't know if that's helpful to think about it in that way.
Yeah, it's definitely helpful. It's still quite difficult though.
Of course, and this is about, it's about having enough strategies and tools that at the moment it's like the anxiety feels like this really big, powerful thing that you feel sort of kind of powerless against. And it's gradually reducing that and increasing your sense of capacity and strategies to work with it, that suddenly the dynamic changes, and it's something that, maybe I get anxious from time to time, but it's not something that dominates or something that feels scary or feels overwhelming. To put another way, the day that one stops being afraid of anxiety, the anxiety's lost its power.
Yeah.
At the moment, you have anxiety about anxiety.
Yeah.
And your anxiety about your anxiety is what's feeding your anxiety.
Yeah.
So when one gets to the point they're not anxious about anxiety, they're just kind of like, they can ride the waves and they know that it's not going to be overwhelming, it suddenly stops having so much power, and then the anxiety massively calms. Does that make it's kind of, I know it sounds there's a lot of words that might sound strange, but I don't know if that makes
it does
sense.
make sense. It just sounds like silly in a way, but yeah.
I think there's a few pieces that would be helpful to put in place. It's learning to work with anxiety is something over a series of sessions, us working together. So I want to put in place some building blocks that help us do that work. And I know that in a sense it can be frustrating to want to kind of, I need to know it all now so I can fix it and not feel anxious anymore. But when something's been in place for a long time, it takes some time to learn the tools and the strategies. What did you, it sounds like module 3, which was looking at things like help pattern, achiever pattern, anxiety pattern, those sorts of things, was more difficult for you to be able to sort of focus with. But I think you mentioned you did some of the exercises. Did you do anything that particularly came from doing that was insightful and helpful?
Yeah, I felt like a lot of the exercises, so there was the one where I would mark like a rating of how I felt. I kind of realised I was never really like 10, but I was never really 0 either.
Right.
And it was like, in a way it was just like making me more anxious, like noticing exactly how I was feeling. And like giving it a rating. Yeah, it wasn't really comforting until there was a moment where I had dropped a level.
And what helped you drop?
I think it was just like being distracted, because I'd like come back to it and be like, oh yeah, I have to do that. And then it'd be like, oh, I like completely forgot that like I was like super anxious this morning. I feel a lot better now. And then like, it was like kind of comforting knowing that I had gone about my day without like giving it much thought or like much power or anything.
which also brings us back to the value of you having something to keep you focused, like for example having the job this week, that it gives you something to do to put your focus into. And when you're just sort of stuck at home, particularly without the money to go off and do sort of fun things, it's like it's easy to go down the sort of rabbit hole of getting caught more and more in your anxiety and your patterns. Are there things that you could be involved in which are not necessarily paid work whilst you're waiting to get paid work? Any kind of volunteer work or things that you could be helping with that would, even if it's not going to give you money, it's going to give you experience and give you confidence?
I think definitely. I think like one of my worries with that then is, oh gosh, I'm not applying for the jobs that I want. So yeah, like there was a job where I was like, oh, I could work, but it was like a part-time job and I would get paid for it, but it wasn't necessarily what I wanted to do. And I just kind of got anxious about that because I thought if I take this job, then I'm not going to apply for the ones that I really want to get.
You know, there's a certain amount of self-wisdom and radical honesty, in a sense, that I think is very important when we're at difficult chapters in our lives. And I think the tendency that we can all have in our own ways is to kind of comfort ourselves by seeing things in the ways that feel familiar and feel habitual. The problem is that if we do what we've always done, we get what we've always got. And if you continue doing things as you are, you're going to continue feeling as you are until hopefully at some point the job happens and then you're in a better place. But then the risk is then the job finishes and then you're back in that place. It's like there's a certain amount of inner work that you need to do, that if you do, your whole life is going to be so much easier and so much better as a result. But that means taking some steps outside of what feels familiar and taking some steps outside of your comfort zone. And it's not doing that in a way that's very self-judgmental or beating up on yourself. It's just being really clear with yourself and saying, I believe there's a chance that things could be better and easier, but I've got to take some brave steps to do that. What would you think about that?
Yeah. Yeah, I know you're right, basically.
What's the resistance that comes up?
It's just I kind of don't really want to like give in to it.
What do you mean by give in to it?
I don't know. I don't really want to like accept that. Oh, like I am anxious and like I don't know.
In a sense, I think there's a place, right, where you want to pretend it's not happening.
Yeah.
And the act of almost like committing to a path of addressing and working on your anxiety is an admittance that it's happening.
Yeah. I think it's also like finding a job as well. I know it would really help me out if I had like a little part-time job or something like that. But the fact of like finding it and going through that is kind of like making me anxious. So I'm kind of like, it's like something that I want to like avoid, even though I know it will make me feel better. Yeah,
But here's the challenge. Applying for it's going to make you anxious, but not applying for it's going to make you anxious.
Yeah.
Like right now, you've learned the strategy of anxiety and you've got good at it. You might not have wanted to get good at it, but you've learned how to be in a state of anxiety. And that's the default that you're going to apply to whatever you do until you learn how to do it differently, which you are beginning to learn and you are able and capable of learning. But again, as I said earlier, what you resist will persist. Pretending that it's not there doesn't make it go away. It actually just gives it more power because then you're having to constantly fight to distract yourself and avoid it.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
You know, and in a sense, some of the upcoming steps and things you need to do are a bit challenging, but they're actually not as challenging as doing nothing, because doing nothing just guarantees you're going to be anxious anyway. Whereas if you actually take these steps, yes, you're going to have some anxiety perhaps along the way, and it's going to be difficult, but you also have the potential that you're moving forwards.
Yeah. I think I just need to force myself to do things sometimes. Yeah, it's just hard, like knowing something is probably what I need, but it's just so hard to like get there, especially when I know it's going to make me anxious, whereas in my mind, doing nothing, I know it's going to make me anxious, but at least I'm not doing anything. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. But it also, just to be quite specific, it's not so much that the thing itself makes you anxious, it's the patterns that you run in your mind about doing it that make you anxious.
Yeah.
And I think that's an important distinction. Because if it's the actual thing that makes you anxious, I get it, you wouldn't want to do it. But what happens is doing that thing triggers a set of thinking patterns that you've learned to do, and that's what you don't want to happen.
Yeah.
But that's also what we want to change. What do you think the next few weeks need to look like in terms of sort of taking your, well, I'm going to say a few more things and then I'll ask you the question. I think how do you feel about doing a daily meditation practice, given you've had some quite positive experiences working with it? How do you feel about committing to doing that?
Yeah, I feel good about that.
Yeah, and I feel, you know, the fact you've been able to do the gym regularly, I feel you can do that. What else do you think needs to happen over the next few weeks?
I need to kind of push myself when I know something will probably make me feel better. Just to kind of choose to go down that route rather than the route of doing nothing, knowing that I'm going to be anxious anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think a key part of this, I think, really is the accepting that you have anxiety at the moment. You're not. I don't subscribe to the idea of someone saying I am an anxious person, because it's not part of your identity. It's a behaviour. It's something you've learned to do.
Yeah.
But if you own it and you admit it, you're empowered then to change it and to do something about it.
Yeah.
What do you think about that? That makes you smile. It's interesting.
It's just a bit daunting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But you know, it being daunting isn't necessarily a bad thing, right? Like, I'm a really big believer in self-esteem, and self-worth is something that we grow and something that we earn. And when we do things that are hard, and we do them anyway, that also grows that muscle that tells you that you can do hard things. And whether you like it or not, you've chosen a hard career, right?
Yeah.
You've chosen a career that's going to involve a lot of, you know, and then lots of small steps that are hard steps. This is your practice. You get used to doing some hard things that feel challenging, but each time you do something that's challenging, you grow your sense of capacity through doing that. 'Cause it's like, well, it's hard, but I did it anyway.
Yeah.
You know, it's, in a sense, this is your training ground for you to become the woman that you need to be to have the career that you want to have. This is not just a hurdle you need to get over. This is the very training ground for you to develop those capacities, to develop the courage, to develop the strength, to develop the commitment, to develop the sticking power, to stick with something like this therapeutic journey, even though at times you're not going to want to, right? That's the, you know, the people that I've worked with over the years, having worked with, you know, very famous, you know, actors, actresses, people in the music industry, that the common denominator among those people is not that they haven't struggled with their minds and emotions, because they feel, all the ones I've worked with have. The common denominator, though, is that when things feel difficult, they've learnt to move forwards anyway, as opposed to when things feel difficult. It's almost like things get hard, we can step back, or we can freeze, or we can step forward. And the people that have the life that I think is what you ultimately want have learned, it wasn't something they were born with, but they've learned that when their impulse is to step back or to freeze, to take a step forward. And I think that's my challenge to you, I think, over the next few weeks. Do it gently with yourself. It's not about your inner critic beating up on you or being cruel to yourself, but it's learning that when your instinct is to pull back or to freeze, to take those gentle steps forward. And that is growing that capacity then inside of you. And it gets easier the more the one practices to do that.
Yeah.
How do you feel about that?
Yeah. I know that it makes sense. I just hope I do it.
Well, here's the thing: you're not going to do it every time, and that's okay, right? This is not about perfection. This is not about being that perfect self that you think you need to be. This is about if some of the time between now and next time you can do that, you've done great. That's the challenge. And I think keeping going, getting going with a daily meditation practice, I think would really help. I'd like you to revisit modules 3 and 4 and to go to module 5. And hopefully what we've talked about today, it will feel a bit easier to do that. Start working with some of what's in there, but then we'll really work with that more together next time as well. So don't feel you have to get it all figured out. Just do the best you can, and then we'll bring more of that, because I want to get more into some tools and strategies next time. But I feel today that this sort of frame and this perspective, I think, is important.
Yeah.
Any questions you have for me?
I don't think so, really.
How do you feel about what you need to do?
I feel a little bit deflated, but I feel okay.
Deflated in what way?
Just that I think I've spent a while not avoiding speaking about it. So I feel like today was just a bit overwhelming.
Can I give you a piece of feedback?
Yeah.
I think you've been really brave in talking about it. And I would like, as you leave, that your internal dialogue not to be a sort of, it was difficult to talk about it and I can't do this because it was difficult to talk about it. I would like your frame to be, it was really difficult to talk about it and I did it anyway. And that's exactly what Alex was talking about, taking that step forward when it feels hard. And if I could do that today, that means that I can go the next step.
Yeah. I'll try.
Most people find this process really hard. Yeah. The reason why most people don't sit in this chair, I don't necessarily mean with the cameras on, that's the whole, you're going like the premium hard. But the reason why most people don't work on the things that are hard is because they're afraid to do so. The problem is they suffer more, not less, as a result. In my view, there are 3 types of people in the world. There are people that have problems that talk to themselves and talk to others about them.
Yeah.
There are those that have problems that talk to themselves but no one else, and those that have problems that deny they even have them. We all have problems, but if we want to make life easier, we have to admit it to ourselves, but that's often not enough. We also need to have support from others. And you've already taken some very brave steps being here. The fact you could do that shows you can do this. Yeah?
Yeah.
Any other questions?
No, not really.
Okay, it's been lovely to see you tonight today. I look forward to seeing you next time.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Hope you enjoyed this week's episode of In Therapy. Please do let us know what you think about this new format. You can share your reflections and thoughts in the comments below. And remember, as we go through the week, we're going to be sharing some of the key moments, key sound bites from this week's episode. Next week, we're going to be catching up again with Al. Al's come to In Therapy to work on his health anxiety. And in next week's episode, we're particularly going to be looking at some of the patterns of thinking which can
drive and perpetuate those anxiety patterns. Here's a taste of what's coming up next week. You've trained a way of thinking and responding, which you can almost go from 0 to 100 miles an hour in that pattern almost instantly, because you've conditioned and trained yourself to do that.
It's the angst that comes from it, and the feeling that like, oh my God, what if I'm dying? You know, like, and then that just colors everything.